Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Harry Loseniziris and the GrecoChess YouTube channel. And we're going now to conclude our coverage of the QCC, the Queen's Chess Club Summer Swiss tournament. We have already shown my game the first 3 rounds. I started with a draw, then I had a loss, and I had a win. And let's see how I'm going to conclude. And let's once again show the location of this tournament. The wonderful church that you see here in Floral Park. The announcement. Queen's Chess Club, QCC Summer G45 Swiss. With time control, as you see here, of G45, D5. What does this mean? It means that when the players start, they have 45 minutes on their clock. And when it's their time to move, for the first 5 seconds, the clock does not move. And then it goes downwards. If it reaches 0 while the game is on, the player whose time first goes down to 0 is considered to have lost a game, no matter how great their position may be. For the third round, my opponent is George Dippel. You see here that his regular rating, his current rating is 1700. And he is in the 90 percentile, meaning he's better than 90% of the US chess players and less good than the remaining 10%. Let's compare this to my numbers once again. My rating is 1554. And I am in the 85.6 percentile, which means that he's stronger than me and the odds are on his side. But let's see what is actually going to happen to the game. Once again, here is the chess.com screen board and the analysis, and in every game, in every move of the game, you're going to see what does the computer think about it. If it gives a plus evaluation, it means that white is better. A minus means that black is better. A 0, of course, means that both sides have the same chances. And it shows if the move played was the best, if not, which would have been the best, and which are the 3 best moves for the other player whose turn is to come. George had the white, I had the black. And George starts with the queen's pawn, d2 to d4, and I reply symmetrically. And he plays the c-pawn. This is the queen's gambit, as you see here, which I have 2 choices, either to accept it, meaning take the pawn, or decline it. Accepting it is very dangerous, especially if you want to keep the pawn, because this weakens the e4 square and the big diagonal from h1 to a8. And if you're not careful, before you know what's happening, your rook at a8 will be lost. That's why I declined it. George develops his knight to c3, and I develop the knight on the other side to f6. He takes a d5 pawn, and I reply by taking it with my e-pawn. There was a time that I would use to take it back with my knight at f6, but then a friend of mine said that if I take it with the pawn instead of the knight, then the bad bishop at c8 becomes good, meaning that the bishop at c8 is not stuck. Before it could only move to d7, now it could go all the way to g4 at least. George pins my knight, bring his bishop to g5, and I unpin it, bringing my bishop to e7. Queen goes to c2. And what worries me, and that's why I played the next move, is what if his knight would go to b5? There are a lot of potential dangers, not yet, but potential. Of course, if the bishop was at f4, it would be much more dangerous, but still, you'd rather not give your opponent this option. That's why I moved my pawn from c7 to c6. He moves his pawn to e3 and castle, short castling as it's called, or kingside castling. Bishop goes to d3 and threatens, after he exchanges his bishop for my knight, to take my pawn at h7. And that's why I move my pawn to h6. He retreats his bishop to h4. And until now, we've played book moves. They're already at move number 9 for white. All 9 plus 8, 17 moves are book moves, meaning they have been analyzed extensively in chess literature. And finally, I escape what's called theory by bringing my bishop to e6, which the computer thinks is a good but not the best. The computer would rather have me put my knight to d7, perhaps to support the other knight. George develops his knight to e2. And now I follow the computer's advice. My knight goes to d7. George castles. And I bring my rook to e8. George will bring his bishop to g3, since at h4 there is not too much he can do. And perhaps wants to stop me from bringing my bishop to d6. I was thinking of doing it to occupy this diagonal, but now if I do it with my knight on d7, it's not going to be possible. I lose my bishop. That's why one thing I do is I bring my knight to f8. The advantage of that, other than allow me to put my bishop to d6 and exchange with his bishop, is that it controls once again the h7 square, and any hopes of checking with his bishop now are gone. He brings his knight to f4. And I bring my bishop to d6, hoping to exchange it. Why? Not yet, of course, because there's a knight in the middle, but if I could take his bishop, why not? Because his bishop is attacking and mine is just defending. George is going to push his f1 pawn to f3. I'm going to take the knight. He'll take back. What's happening is that when your opponent is attacking, if possible, exchange the attacking pieces. Have fewer pieces to attack. And now his bishop takes my bishop. And my knight goes to h5, which the computer considers a great move. Usually you don't like to put your knight at the end of the board because it controls fewer squares. For example, here it controls only 4 squares, 1, 2, 3, 4, instead of 8, as it would do in the center. But this makes sure that the bishop has no future, the bishop at f4. Because any square it goes, it's going to be lost or exchanged. To postpone this possibility, he puts it on e5, where it cannot immediately be lost. That's why it's considered to be the best. But with pushing my pawn to f6, now it cannot go anywhere. That's why the computer once again thinks a great move on my side. He'll put it on g3, minimize the losses. I'm going to take it. And third move in a row, the computer thinks a great move, and his h-pawn will take my knight. So George does not have his pair of bishops, and also his g-pawns are doubled. And his g3 pawn, by the way, is unprotected. I'm not attacking, but if I was attacking it, things could be nice. That's why I'm bringing my queen to d6 to attack it and forcing him to think about defending the pawn. Until now, he was mostly the one that was having attacking thoughts. He brings his queen to f2, a whole queen just to protect the pawn at g3. The bishop goes to f7 now. The reason being I want to open the e file for my rook. My rook is attacking the e3. My queen is attacking the g3, and my opponent, George, has a queen at f2 that is just doing that, defending the 2 pawns at e3 and g3. If only I could bring my second force to attack any one of them. For example, if I had the knight and f5, without, of course, this bishop here, it would be wonderful because it would attack both pawns. But enough of daydreaming. George wants to advance. His pawn goes to f4. inaccuracy on the computer, and finally I'm slightly ahead. Until now, I was slightly behind. My queen goes to e6, and I'm really attacking the pawn a second time, but the rook will defend it. My queen goes to d7, hoping to bring something else. Queen goes to f3. Something else, I mean, perhaps two rooks or two rooks and a queen. From now on, for quite a few moves, I'm going to have a very small advantage. You see the minuses here. My rook goes to e7, hoping to put my second rook here and have very strong control of the semi-open. It's called e-file. It's called semi-open because there's only one pawn, one white pawn here, no black pawns. If this disappeared, it would be completely open file. George will push his pawn from g3 to g4. I'm going to bring here my other rook here to e8. So e-file, the semi-open, is controlled by two of my rooks and one of George's rooks. I wish I could take the e3 pawn, but it's attacked twice from my two rooks and defended twice from the rook and the queen. Thoughts I could have in my mind, but there was no follow-up. I could take the pawn of my two rooks, you take it once the rook, once the queen, and then my queen would take the pawn at g4. My queen has a very nice position, but it's alone. I have sacrificed the rook for two pawns. If there was anybody else to help my rook, for example, a knight at h4, that would be wonderful, but you have to act versus what's happening, not versus what you would like to happen. If you can make that true, if there was a way I could bring my knight to h4, perhaps I could, but I didn't think of it. Maybe my knight could go to g6 and then h4. I would need to have two moves. But now it is George's turn to play, and he wants to strengthen his defense. The rook goes from e1 to a2. My bishop goes to e6, and I am attacking for a second time the pawn at g4. If I could play again, not only would take the pawn, but I would threaten the queen and win the rook. The computer would rather have me place bishop on g6. I think I understand why, because if we exchange bishops, my knight would go to g6 and then to h5. And Jews can see that it's not easy to save the pawn at g4. In fact, it's impossible. The only two moves you could do, either put his bishop at f5, then we exchange bishops, and then my queen would win the pawn, or otherwise push his pawn from f4 to f5. That's what he does, pushing his pawn, threatening my bishop, and saving his pawns. This, on the long term, could weaken his position towards the f file. But for the time being, I need to save my bishop, and he has only one square to go, f7. His rook goes to e1, so now he equalizes the control of the e file. My knight goes to h7. Now, it's not possible any longer to put it to g6 and h5 as I was dreaming, because the g6 square is covered by the f5 pawn. But I was thinking put it here and then put it on g5. Let's see if this will happen. At least the first part happened. Queen goes to f2. And yes, my knight goes to g5, but the queen has already moved. At this time, I'm thinking that if this pawn at g2 was not present, I ought to have a wonderful fork and win the queen. If I do it now, I lose my knight to the pawn, and unfortunately, there is no follow-up. Queen goes to f4. Once again, without his pawn, knight go to h3, have a fork, and win the queen. Why I'm thinking of this? You might worry, you might think these are pipe dreams. Why think of them? Because if by any chance your opponent does this mistake and moves the pawn here from g2 to g3, you need to be ready immediately. And if there is a small chance that this will happen next move, a very small chance, there is some chance it might happen at some point during the game. So that's a really good idea to always think not only the best moves of the opponent, but if there are any mistakes they can make, how to exploit them immediately. They decide now to switch the game to the other side, see if there's anything they can do on the queen side. For the time being, it's quite inactive. And they push my pawn to b5. Perhaps if George would strengthen his attack on the king side, then my pawns A and B would have a future. The computer thinks it's inaccuracy, and finally, instead of giving me the advantage, gives now George advantage. George is stopping any dream by pushing his pawn to b4. Now the pawn is unprotected. Not a good move of the computer. Who knows if I could save it. My queen goes to d8. Unfortunately, cannot go to d6, it lost. Goes to d8, hoping to have a future in the queen side. He places his king to f2. And the computer thinks a mistake and gives me quite a large advantage, almost a pawn. Once again, without the g2 pawn, I would have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful fork. I'm going now to follow the computer's advice. The best move on the computer, and my pawn goes to a5. If George takes it with the b4 pawn, my queen will take it back, threaten the knight, threaten the a2 pawn, and things could go well there. George will defend it with the a3 pawn a2 to a3. I exchange the pawns. The reason being that, first of all, the pawn at b4 is still unprotected. The question is how to attack it. My queen would need quite a lot of moves. It has to go to a8, a3, b4, perhaps 3 moves. The knight would have a long, difficult task going 1, 2, 3. Even like that, 4, no, 4, 5, 6 moves to go there. If the position is stable and it's not easy to move pieces, you might need to think about it. How many moves can one of your pieces go to the place we'd like to be? What I'm trying to do now is control the A file. Queen goes to A8. The computer thinks a mistake, would rather have me put my rook to A7. And you're going to see why. Because now the George's rook goes to a2, and I cannot take the rook because then I have to take my queen. If my rook was here, perhaps we could exchange, and then I could bring back the queen. Then I would have an advantage. I don't want to lose control of the a file. That's why I'm bringing my rook to a7, and George wants to win the control by placing his rook at a1. Meaning, if I exchange the rooks, then the queen is attacked by the rook, and I cannot take it because of the knight. And I lose control of the a file, and that's why I move my rook to e7. Even though the computer would rather have me exchange the rooks and bring my queen back to d8. George will push his queen to d6, threatening my rook on e7. And I see that the position becomes harder and harder in the a file. Too many threats. Then I decide to simplify the position by exchanging the rooks. Great move on the computer. George will take it back, and I keep control of the a file by moving my rook from e7. Sorry, that's not what I did at that point. My rook was on e7. I wanted to do it, but look what would happen if I did it. Then we'd exchange rooks and the c6 pawn would be lost. And then the b4 and b5 and d5 pawn would be lost. That's why even though I was thinking about it, and I'm sorry, that's why I misspoke now, I decided finally not to do it and bring my queen to e8. The pawn at c6 is a crucial one. That's why the computer thinks the best. The crucial is the c6 is crucial because if this is lost, then also the b5 and d5 pawns could be lost, and the b4 and d4 pawns would become passed pawns, and George would have a huge advantage. Till now, I'm able to hold on myself. The advantage goes a little bit back and forth, but now it's exactly equal and will stay equal now that the queen is on f4. In fact, now I even may have a small advantage, minus 0.25. And at this point, I made a move that the computer thinks it's wrong. And let me tell you what was my thought. How are my pieces doing? Queen Rook on the E file, the semi-open, have a nice control of it. Things seem to be nice. They're doing what they can for the time being. My knight at g5, not ideal, but at least is near the opponent's queen and stops the pawn of g to move into g3 because I have the what's called the royal fork and I win the queen. My pawns out of the 6-3 and dark squares, that is good. Since my bishop is in light color, I want my pawns to be a dark color so they don't stop my bishop. My bishop at f7 is not doing well because there's not too much can do. In fact, it can go exactly nowhere. They wanted to find a way to activate my bishop. The move I decided to do was check with my knight. My opponent needs to take it back. The computer thinks it's a mistake and would rather have me put my rook on d7. I'm not even sure why. What will I gain out of that? My thought is the following. If he moves his king, I immediately move the knight. Great. If he takes it with the knight, then I take the pawn and I have a double threat. I threat both his bishop and my bishop at f7 finally is open and threatens the rook. I'm winning again. If he takes it with the bishop as he did, I take it back. With the pawn. Exactly what happened. And my bishop is free and starts its free life by attacking the rook on a2. So I really thought that I'm doing quite well. But the computer doesn't think so. Finally, it starts giving an advantage to my opponent more than a pawn. And of course, George saw that his rook was under threat. He spends a move to send it to a5. And I want now to make my bishop as active as possible. And I put it on c4 with thoughts of putting it later to d3. And having a great position in my enemy's half of the board, protected by the pawn at d4. So my queen, my rook wouldn't need to think about protecting my pawn. George will put his queen on d6 and threaten. What exactly is he threatening? No, he's not threatening the pawn at c6, but it might happen later if you put his rook here, because currently it's only defended by the queen at e8. And then until now, I've been holding my ground. Now I'm a little bit behind, but I have a reasonable chance of holding the game, but now I blundered. My bishop goes to d5, and I did it in order to protect my pawn at c6. The computer places two question marks, thinks it's blunder, and George's advantage from being up a little bit more than a pawn now is more than a rook, more than the 5 pawns. And George doesn't miss his opportunity. He sees immediately what's happening. takes my bishop, pawn takes it back. Queen takes my pawn with a check. I don't want my king to be on the 8th rank because that's what would happen. Then rook goes here, queen is pinned and it's lost. So that's why I do the only possible move. King goes to h7. At least I avoid this danger. But it doesn't save the game because George will place his rook on a8. And now what can I do? Queen doesn't have too many squares to go. Think about it. Stays anywhere in the 8th rank, it's lost. If it goes d7, c6, it's lost. Goes to f7, at least can be exchanged. g6, h5, it's lost. So there are only two moves to be. Of course, if I take the rook, I lose my queen to be considered. Either I go to f7, which is what I did, or the rook goes to d7, and he takes. He takes my queen, and then I take his queen. But still a pawn ahead, and I knew that any exchange would help him because he has a pass pawn on the d file, the d4, meaning if queens and rooks would suddenly somehow completely disappear, George would have a very good chance to win it because of his pawn at d4. Still, it's not so easy for his king to advance, but his king could go g3, f4, and e4 and take it. My king would too far away to do anything. What could I do? I didn't want to exchange, but definitely I didn't want to lose my queen. So I pushed my queen to f7. But George is not even to exchange, and he sends his queen at d8. You see the evaluation, even my best move has an M in front of it, which mating. That would mean that under best play, George would mate in perhaps 13 moves at most. What could I do now? Computer thinks I should place my rook on e8 and I lose my rook. I was thinking anyway I can check because I knew that if I didn't check, I would lose at least a rook. Well, queen can go to a2 and check, but there the rook would take it. I was thinking and thinking and thinking. In addition, if I did anything else, for example, if I move my rook to b7, then none of my pieces is taking, but George has a checkmate on on h8. That's why the problem is not so much that I would lose at least a rook, which is the minimum damage I could do, but that I was going to be mated. And that is why at this moment I resigned. George, congratulations. You fought a very tough game. You played quite well. You deserve the win. Now let's look at the review. What does the computer of chess.com thinks about the game? George had 93.8 accuracy, quite a good one. I had 86.5. And according to the computer, George played at a level of 2500, meaning Grandmaster level, and I played at the level of 2300. Once again, I need to tell you, consider these numbers to be quite flattering. Both of us played a great opening and middle game. Great for accuracy, 100% for both of us for the opening. But as you see, and I hope this is going to show that memorizing opening lines is not enough, even though I played opening 100% correct. And yes, these moves I can memorize them. I need to tell you, didn't find them on the board. Even though I would double check them to make sure that I'm not messing up. That was not enough for me to give me the game. George had 92.4 at the middle game. I had 84%. George deserved the win. He played better than me, especially near the end, because you can keep the game, and I'm proud that I kept the game, and he's a very strong opponent for how many moves? For 36 moves. Out of the 44 moves for the 36 first moves, I was holding my ground. And then I went according to a general principle, make sure all your pieces are active, and if not, find the least active and strengthen it. And that's what I tried to do with my bishop, but unfortunately this was a mistake. But I'm not sure what would have happened had I kept my bishop inactive forever. Let's see now the particulars. Brilliant, none of us had a brilliant. Great moves. George had 3, I had 2. Best moves, 15 for George, 9 for me. Excellent, 7 for George, 11 for me. Good, 4 for George, 5 for me. Book. The first 9 moves, as I mentioned, George played according to the theory, and I played the first 8. Inaccuracies. George had 4, I had 2 mistakes, I had 4 of them. Misses, George missed twice, I missed once, and blunder 1. And this was when I placed my bishop at c6 near the end of the game. Not at c6, I'm sorry, I placed at the square of d5. This concludes the coverage, and before we conclude, one last detail. Let's see what happened at the overall tournament. We're going to see the final ratings. Jay Bonin was the overall win. He had 4 out of 4. Jay, once again, congratulations, you did great. Brian Lawson defeated me last week, got the second place, 3 out of 4 points. And the tournament directors, Lila Farman and Jay Kleinman, got 4th and 5th place. One of the participants was the father of Lila Farman, Joseph Farman, even though he didn't do well. He entertained us at the opening of yesterday's evening. He sang to us a few beautiful Italian songs. That was a wonderful moment. Yes, it's very, very rare for a chess tournament to start by having a singer display their singing talents. He entertained us last week. It was Lila, his daughter. That was a wonderful moment. That concludes the covering of the Queen's Chess Club, the Swiss Summer Tournament. I ended up with 1.5 out of 4, 1 win, 1 draw, and 2 losses. My rating went up a little bit from 1560 to 1563, and we're going to return next video with the bots. We have defeated the first 10 bots. Time for bot number 11. Once again, if you have any games you'd like me to show and highlight and present, I'll be glad to do so. Just email me or contact me anyway through Facebook or any other way. Thanks for the ones that subscribed. If you like the channel, you may want also to subscribe. Then once some of you have already clicked the like button, have left some nice comments. Thank you very much. And most of all, thanks to all the viewers. That's the reason why I'm publishing these videos on YouTube. We'll continue with the chess bots. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Harry Lasaniziris. This is Greco Chess. Goodbye.